So I get attached to fictional characters. I have a sticker on my computer that warns people of this. I really love a good book series. There have been series that I have been reading for almost going on 40 years now. So that means there are some fictional characters that I have lived with longer than I have lived with my husband. So yeah, I get attached to characters. And it doesn't have to be in books. It can be a TV show. It can be a movie. The characters are what I like about a story. And one of the things I love in a story or a TV show or a movie, and perhaps because I do get so invested in the characters, is I love an epilogue. Yeah, an epilogue. You know, that's where they, after everything's over, they then kind of add a little extra and it shoots you into the future, usually a year, but sometimes it can be for much longer. And they kind of tell you how everybody's doing. And I feel like it kind of adds a little weight to the story, even if the story itself is not very weighty, because it tells you that the story mattered, that the story you have just read, you see how they are living it out. You know, you find out that he has stayed sober and she got her PhD and the relationship worked out and the town recovered. You know, you find all those things out. The story did matter. They are still living out the story. The story still goes on. Love a good story, and I particularly love a story with an epilogue. Now, our story tonight, you know, it's one that you have heard over and over and over again, and it has been told many, many times in many, many different ways by many, many different people. But as stories go, it's not really much of one in terms of, you know, word count. It doesn't even take up a whole chapter in the Bible to get the story told. You know, it's the story of two nobodies from absolutely nowhere who are called to bring the child of God into this world, God fully human, fully divine. Mary, the mother, is not much more than a child herself who gives birth in less than ideal circumstances, and the only people there to bear witness are a ragtag group of shepherds. Oh, and a host of heavenly hosts. And yeah, that's the story of how the Son of God came into the world. It is the story of a baby born to poor people in the midst of occupied territory. If there was a way for God to enter into this world in a more vulnerable state, I can't imagine what it would be. Now, there are people who believe that this is the beginning of the story of how we all get to heaven. And I just want to tell you, if you think that the story of Christmas, that the story of God with us, that God becoming one of us is only about how we're going to get into heaven, then you are having quite an adventure and missing the point, my friend. This story isn't about God rescuing us from humanity. This is God becoming one of us and getting right there in it with us. This is God committing to humanity, committing to us. And of course, we know the rest of the story. Jesus grows up, he becomes a prophet, he goes around telling people to love their neighbor and forgive their enemies, and they killed him for it. And yes, that is quite reductionist, but it's basically what happened. And in the biggest plot twist in history, Jesus doesn't stay dead, he is resurrected on the third day. But of course, that's not the end of the story. The story goes on. We are living in that story. So just indulge me on this Christmas Eve, and let's imagine that when it comes to the Christmas story, the story of Jesus coming into this world, that we are the epilogue. That we are the epilogue, our lives living in this time and in this place right now. So as long as we're imagining, let's imagine that there's somebody out there who has not heard the Christmas story. I know there are actual people out there like that. So let's imagine someone is reading the story of Christmas for the very first time. And then they look to us for the epilogue, to see how it's going, to see if it mattered. I'm afraid that if they did, they would decide that, you know, in the end, Herod won. Okay, just breaking in here because, of course, I have realized as I was editing that, you know, Herod is not part of the Luke narrative. The story we read on Christmas Eve, we don't hear a lot about Herod. You're going to need to go to Matthew 2 to read about that. But for the purposes of this message, you just need to know that Herod is the bad guy, the powers that be, the oppressor. Herod is everything that is wrong with the world in this story. Okay, we're going to continue now. I'm afraid that if they did, they would decide that, you know, in the end, Herod won. I mean, look at us. Look at how we treat the stranger and the outcast and the marginalized. Look at how the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Geez, look at how we talk to one another. Look at how easily and quickly and harshly we decide who does and doesn't belong. Yeah, I fear that anybody looking at the Christmas story for the first time and then looking at the world around us would decide that, yeah, fear beat love, power beat vulnerability, and that violence won out in the end. I imagine they could read the story and look around and go, well, that story didn't go very far, did it? You can see how they might think that. But let me tell you, even if they do think that, even if you think that sometimes, if it feels like Herod has won, that Herod is winning, I'm here to tell you that they are wrong and you are wrong. Herod only wins if you buy into the empire's definition of victory. Herod only wins when we confuse our salvation with success or God's grace with what it looks like to get ahead. Herod only wins if what we believe is that money matters and power is the point. And let me tell you, that is not the story of Christmas. The story of a God who bursts into human history as a poor and vulnerable baby has already shown us that if we think Herod wins, then we too have really missed the point. So how is your epilogue going? Your own story? You know, we don't have control over the whole narrative. We don't even have control over the choices the characters in our story make. However, we do have some say in the story our own lives tell, in the choices we make. We can be the epilogue that this story deserves. Every time we choose compassion over cruelty, every time we refuse to dehumanize one of God's beloved children, every time we choose to love our neighbors, even if it costs us something, every time we choose to stand with the vulnerable instead of the powerful, we are continuing the story of Christmas and living into the lives that Christ, who came into this world as a poor and vulnerable child, calls us to. Friends, the story of Christmas is also our story. Let us live it in such a way that the light of Christ shines through us into a world in desperate need of some relief from the darkness. Merry Christmas, everybody.